So I'm a male nurse at a large hospital in San Francisco. I work in the ER, and as is custom Thanksgiving night it was very busy. Now my wife is also a nurse for the same hospital. She works in labor and delivery. Between babies being born left and right and the people coming into the ER, we hadn't had a chance to take a break together as we try to do every shift. So when she called, I figured it was to say she wanted to meet up for a bite to eat in the cafeteria. When I answered, I heard in the background a male voice screaming profanities in the background, and my wife, who is fluent in Spanish, trying to calm this guy down. She told me their pager wasn't working and they needed security stat. I quickly hung up, called for security, told my fellow nurses what was going on, and ran for labor and delivery, worried sick about my wife. When I ran almost square smack dab into this visibly angry man, he wasn't huge but bro definitely worked out and not at the gym, he was covered in prison tattoos and he was obviously a banger. I work out regularly but I knew this guy could kick my ass. He looked at me, gave me this sick grin and started heading towards me, sprouting off in Spanish. I don't speak fluent Spanish but what I could understand scared the living shit out of me. I'm backing up as fast as I can. I start buzzing the door to the ER frantically for them to let me in. This guy's literally a foot away from me and the door opens and I'm pulled into safety by a doctor. Gangbanger punches the door a few times, makes a dragging sign across his throat while grinning at us both. Next thing I know, the police rush into the quarter he's in and it takes 2 security officers and 2 cops to subdue this dude. I finally make it to my wife, who thankfully was shaken up but unhurt. She explained to me what happened. A young girl only 14 came in, high fever, vomiting, distended belly. The banger claimed he was her brother and they needed to cut her open to get her baby. They did an ultrasound and to their horror they realized she wasn't pregnant, she had bags of drugs in her stomach. It's very common for drug mules to bring over young women from Mexico carrying drugs that way. Homeboy freaked out when they informed him his sister needed emergency surgery. And no, he wasn't getting his drugs. Thankfully the girl survived, but the sad thing is she will be going to most likely be deported once she recovers. So gangbanger who wants to kill me, let's never meet again. I've been lurking on this sub for a while, and wanted to share my story. It was Thanksgiving 2011 and I was celebrating at my grandparents' farm in the little town of Seville, Florida. It's north of D-Land. I had way too much to eat that holiday and was about to leave to drive back to school in Tallahassee. I stopped at the one little gas station in town to fill up before getting on the highway. I had just finished filling up when a lady walked up to me. She was really ratty looking with crazy blonde dyed hair. But this is the backwoods of Florida, so no judgment. There were really kind people who looked like that in those parts. She started talking to me about how her car had run out of gas. She pointed to an old junker parked over near the convenience store, and if I could possibly give her some cash to get home. I usually don't say yes to things like that, but it was Thanksgiving weekend, so I was feeling extra generous. I told her that I'd be happy to fill up her car a little to get her home. Then it started getting weird. She kept insisting I give her cash and that the car was so empty, she couldn't drive it to a pump. I don't know why I didn't leave right there and then, but again, I was in a very good mood. I told her if she had a gas can, I would put some in, but I didn't feel comfortable giving her cash. She kept objecting but eventually went over and pulled a gas can from her car. I started filling it up. She put her hand on me and said, "Do you have a girlfriend?" I told her no, politely. She said she wanted to pay me back somehow for the gas and asked if I wanted to come to her place. I told her no, less politely. She kept touching my shoulder thanking me, and then offered me a BJ behind the station, so I stopped the gas pump, got in my car, and left her there with the gas can. I called my mom a little later and told her about the creepy, sleazy encounter. This lady was apparently all over the news. She was a prostitute in town and had been at a party earlier. An exchange had gone south and her baby had been kidnapped by a client of hers and left under a bush in town. She hadn't even bothered to call the police about the missing child until later. They were both arrested and charged. My friend Connor has a girlfriend who lives a few hours away, and her mom reads all her texts. So they generally stick to Skype. Well, after a while, his girlfriend, Ellie, wants to introduce him to her Skype friends. This is a group of people who met in various places across the internet, who have those awful, clusterfuck chats you can't keep up with. Then she introduces him to Jack. Jack is the epicenter of the group. Connor mentions him to me in passing a few times over about a month, and then he finally messages me one night and says, "I need to talk to you." So we talk. And he tells me what Jack's been saying. Jack is what I like to refer to as liar, crazy, legit. And I estimate the odds of each of those at 50, 49 and 1. See, Jack claimed to be a supernatural being. which I'd normally laugh off, except he's got a group of hapless people convinced of this. And Connor describes the group dynamics and its red flags all around for controlling behavior. And, well, it's sort of my specialty, dealing with people like Jack. But Connor doesn't want to stir up trouble, because he's non-confrontational. I don't have similar inhibitions. So, one night, C invites me into the group chat, which is ominously dubbed The Truth. Cults have a collective belief, in varying levels, in something. In this case, the truth about Jack. The first thing anyone says to me is, "Did you get Jack's permission?" Every alarm bell in my system goes off. Connor and I both play dumb. Slowly, hesitantly, a few other members of the group, all strangers to me, start saying hello. Not welcoming me, not asking how I know Connor, not trying to explain that the chat is kinda private. Just saying tentative hellos. The girl who first demanded to know if Jack gave me permission to join announces she's asked Jack if I'm allowed to stay. Connor, meanwhile, is messaging me about group dynamics. The only non-believer Connor knows of is King, who's vocal about his problems with Jack. I talk to King, who tells me that the other person who doesn't believe is the girl who challenged me about entering the group. Red flag number 1, someone who doesn't believe Jack is still the first to challenge outsiders. Cults don't appreciate outsiders, that's about when Jack arrives. He's likable, don't get me wrong. He is good at what he does. I think, for about 30 minutes, that he's too good for me to be any use. But I'm a writer, so I can commit to a character pretty well, and he buys into my Southern Belle act. Once he invites me to a private chat, I'm immediately told that I can ask him anything, without fear of repercussions. Dude lives 600 miles from me, what the fuck kind of repercussions could there be? So I talk to King and the girl who challenged me, and it turns out he's doing something else that's seen in cults. He's using threats and fear to get people to obey him. Something about being sold into magical slavery if he doesn't protect them. I'm gonna pause here to say, the people who don't believe Jack are the most emotionally stable ones. There are abuse victims and depressed teenagers in this little group. They're smart, but they have two options, believe Jack, or lose friends. Anyway, back to the circle of creepy. Jack's Skype mood is going to kill my brother. I inquire. He tells me that his brother stabbed him with a sword, and sides with their father, whom Jack hates. Half of this guy's lore comes from the Dresden Files. For a creepy would-be cult leader, he really sucks at lying, so I mark him down for dysfunctional IRL family and possible violent tendencies. I then lure Jack into a trap. I won't bore you with the details, but I get irrevocable, screenshotted proof that he's a lying liar who lies, not delusional and not legit. I let Jack know the jig is up. His retaliation? He decides he should ban me and Connor from the group. But before he can, I go off on a nice little tangent in the group chat about a Criminal Minds episode where a cult leader kicks out anyone who challenges him, lest the others be swayed. Jack is pissed at me. Really pissed. Like, hope this motherducker can trace my IP address or I am dead pissed. But it doesn't end there. Oh, no.
Jack returns to the group chat with a sob story, and I let him stew, because I've been slowly working my way through the group, ripping off the Jack is a liar who lies and manipulates and really you shouldn't tell this guy your real name, no really band-aid. I go talk to King, who tells me that his fellow non-believer, Challenger, has a picture of Jack's ID. Because I believe in having leverage, I do some totally legal digging into this guy, who has an unfortunately unique surname. Dear Jack's mom, you should change your Facebook security settings. Some fun facts about Jack. His little brother is a jock. Better looking, mesomorph body, athletic, popular. Jack is none of these things. His mom stops talking about her eldest son quite suddenly. No more pictures of Jack. Not a single mention of Jack since he was 18. So I made note of it and moved on with my background check. But then I noticed something. An arrest. Not unusual, except before the arrest date, he and his brother are equally pictured on their mom's FB. And then, nothing. I can't figure it out until I'm talking to Jack, distracting him and letting him talk himself in circles. I see his mood again. Gonna kill my brother. Dear gods, I think, remembering that every lie holds a kernel of truth. He actually has a brother he wants to kill. I ask him why he was arrested, even though I feel it in my gut that I'm right. Assault, he says. On whom? On my brother.
I need confirmation on a few other things before I present the facts to the group, still called The Truth, even as more and more members sit behind their computers marveling at the irony. So I keep talking to him, to make sure I had the right Jack, that I'm not dealing with a catfish creep. We video chatted. It is him, mugshot and ID confirm. He keeps asking me questions. Where do I live? North of you. What do I do for a living? Consult. How old am I?
17. What's your full name?
Hell no, I, like Jack, have one of those last names that are incredibly rare. He could find it, if he Googled me. At any point, Jack could do 5 minutes of Googling and find my full name. First, middle, and last. Anyway, I told the group chat about Jack lying that day. And shut down his manipulative attempts to garner sympathy. Now he says he's dying and his father's a mobster and his brother is his adoptive brother. Except there's no one around for this, equally bullhide, story. He's trying to convince me. Just me. Thanksgiving night a couple years ago, I was sitting in my parents' family room watching a movie when my younger sister burst through the door, hysterical. I asked her what was wrong, but she was panicking to the point that she couldn't speak. She just kept trying to call her boyfriend. After calming down, she explained to us that while she was driving home on a dark, somewhat secluded road, a couple of creeps began harassing her. They were driving uncomfortably close behind her, and then they tried running her off the road. She called her boyfriend who came to her rescue by getting the guy's attention. My sister made it home, but she was worried about her boyfriend because he wasn't answering his phone. After calling again and again, he finally picked up his phone. My sister overheard some of the conversation he was having with these jerks, and she heard someone say something about a gun. She freaked out, and my parents called the police and took her down to meet with her boyfriend and a cop. Apparently, the guys were drunk and had pulled a gun on her boyfriend. They found them, and hopefully punished them accordingly. People are idiots. I met my stalker when I was in middle school. My school consisted of 7th grade through 12th grade, and had a normal program and an accelerated program, with the students in each program being pretty segregated. My friends and I belonged to the accelerated program, but there was one guy in the group from the normal program, Carson. All in all, we were typical teenagers, with Carson being the group's prankster. We only could hang out at school, because we were all shipped in from various parts of the county for the accelerated program, so after school we would all get on AOL to chat and play games. Online we had even more friends, as we'd invite our own local friends to also chat with us. One day, Carson invited his friend Steve to join the chat. He was nice and contributed a lot to our conversations. We learned Steve actually attended our school, but he was in the normal program and had a different lunch period than the rest of us, so we had almost no chance of crossing paths. We insisted on meeting him, however, and scheduled for Steve to come to my locker before first period. The next morning we waited and Steve never came. My friend and I did have a short exchange with another kid, Marco, which consisted of us telling him to go away. Marco had been Carson's satellite since the beginning of the year. Wherever Carson went, Marco would stand 10 to 15 feet away, just watching us. We had tried being friends with him, but he was simply too strange for us. He would touch your face unexpectedly, or try and sneak up behind you to bite you, or tell you he wanted to see you inside out. His list of strange behaviors was a mile long. A few days after Steve failed to come meet us, it came to light that Steve was really Marco and that the whole thing was one of Carson's pranks. Considering Marco had been a pleasant addition to the chat as Steve, we gave him another chance to join the real group. Besides Carson, I was the only person that really gave Marco a chance. He still did the weird things he had always been doing, but it was now apparent that it was all an act to get attention for being the weird guy. Marco was being abused at home by his mom's boyfriend. He rarely saw his mom, because she worked so much. Marco was the poster child for bad attention is still attention. Still, my friends wanted him out of the group, and I repeatedly found myself arguing his case to let him stay. Once I caught an older student, a boy that lived on my street, beating Marco up. Being much larger than either of us, he was literally picking Marco up and slamming him into the lockers while he called him a freak. Knowing the bully and his mother, I did what was my signature move at the time and kicked him in the balls while threatening to tattle to his parents about how he was treating me and my friends. I believe this was the catalyst for years of torment, as Marco became my satellite after that day. At school Marco followed me any chance he got. At home, Marco messaged me non-stop, typically in private chat, as my other friends wanted nothing to do with him. I felt bad, because he was a sweet kid besides his attention-seeking stunts, and no one should have to go through life with no friends. Eventually Marco asked me out, which I politely declined. He was my friend, but he was not the type of guy I would ever be interested in dating. He was persistent, begging me to give him a chance. Over and over again I would have to tell him no. One day his approach changed. You will go out with me or I'll show your mom all of our chat logs. There was nothing especially bad in the logs. I wasn't drinking or doing drugs or really anything bad, but I was pretty depressed at the time and sometimes talked about wanting to kill myself. If my parents saw that, I could effectively kiss my freedom and privacy goodbye. I bluffed him, telling him good luck with any attempts to convince my parents to believe him over me, which seemed to work. I wasn't very impressed with the stunt and stopped talking to him. A few weeks went by, and Marco came crawling back, begging for forgiveness. I eventually caved, allowing him back into the group. At first he was well behaved again. But slowly he started pestering me to be his girlfriend. Over the course of high school, he tried many different methods: begging, blackmailing, attacking my self-esteem, "You're ugly, you're a slut," etc., catfishing, threatening any guys I dated, threatening suicide, and more. I tried to be nice at first, but eventually had to get pretty mean in how I said no. His behavior would always reach a boiling point that forced me to cut him out of our friend group. It was nearly impossible to actually get rid of him, however. Online he would create dozens of new accounts to send messages from, overwhelming my attempts to block him. He would call my phone all night long and leave woeful messages about how lonely he was and how he would kill himself if I stopped being his friend. He would show up at my house and stand outside my bedroom window randomly. When my parents had parties, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, Halloween, etc., he always managed to find out and show up. Their parties were always pretty big with an open-door policy, so he'd slip in, typically in disguise. He'd then ultimately do something to get thrown out, like get belligerently drunk, or stuff his face with finger foods and then put them back on the serving platters. The first time I really felt that Marco might actually be a threat was at one of my parents' Halloween parties when we were 16. One of my dad's friends had a son our age, Tim, that was a bit of a jerk. He fancied himself pretty cool and thought it would be fun to pick a fight with the weird kid to make a display of his own superior strength. Marco accepted his challenge. We all knew he was about to get the crap beat out of him. Going out into the streets, Tim towered over Marco. That year Marco was dressed as Alex from A Clockwork Orange, his favorite book, with his costume including a cane. He swung the cane at Tim, hitting him in the head with it. Tim went down quickly, and Marco beat him until an adult intervened and sent him home. Marco's go-to threat whenever I had a boyfriend was I'll beat him to death with a shovel and then use it to bury his body. Our senior year of high school, Marco's dad died in prison. He learned the real reason his dad was in prison was for murdering someone. He'd always thought his dad was in for drugs, and Marco started to spiral out of control. He said his dad was a murderer, so he must also be doomed to be a murderer. He dropped out of school halfway through the year. My brother said after I'd left home for college, Marco came to the house looking for me a few times. Once he figured out I wasn't there, he'd just come and stand in the front yard aimlessly, playing with a Bic lighter, until someone threatened to call the police. One of my biggest worries was that he'd try to set their house on fire in some weird way of trying to punish me. When I'd go home with my boyfriend, he'd always show up at my parents' house. At one point he tried to intimidate my boyfriend into breaking up with me by showing him he had a hunting knife. It was always a big ordeal getting him to leave. A lot of the issues have now eased up just due to the distance and time. I don't use much social media anymore and I'm able to semi-block people on my phone. It's a bit weird. I can see when a blocked number tries to call me, but it doesn't ring, and I'm able to receive voicemails and text messages from blocked numbers, but not pictures. Initially he was calling and texting every day. Hundreds of messages. I tried asking him to stop, but this only encouraged him. My family no longer lives in that area, so I'm significantly less worried for their safety. I've found the most successful way of dealing with Marco is simply ignoring him. Eventually his messages dwindled down to once a week, then once a month, now I maybe hear from him officially once a year. His message is typically something along the lines of "Please, just be my friend. I won't try for anything more. I need you in my life." The last time I actually talked to him, which was about 4 to 5 years ago now, Marco tried to tell me I'd ruined his life. He said I had put some spell on him that he couldn't move forward with his life. He told me he would kill himself and it would be my fault. I finally had to tell him that I wouldn't care if he killed himself, in fact it would be a relief. His most recent mo is to call my work phone from a private number just to hear me answer the phone and then hang up. He also calls and texts my brother, our high school friends, my brother's best friend, my parents, my grandparents, my aunt, and my husband to beg them to ask me to call him. Marco messaged my husband, "Tell her she is my angel. The love of my life. I'm nothing without her. I worry he will snap someday and show up at my house or my job to kill me. I have security systems and other means of protection, but I still get paranoid about it. I've talked to the police about getting a restraining order, but they've told me there's no real grounds unless he does start showing up and threatening to kill me. So I guess we'll see what happens.